Welcome to this second week focusing on infectious diseases. This week we're going to reflect critically on the advances that have been made in terms of controlling infectious diseases and the challenges that we continue to face. In order to put this into some context, I'm going to share with you some of the key events and developments from a global health perspective that I feel have played a major role in forming my personal viewpoint of the current infectious disease landscape. Later, I'm going to ask you to work together on the discussion board and compare your own reflections with the ones that I have presented here. Over the last 40 years, there have been many changes with regards to the global disease landscape, driven in part by the process of globalization. The global population has almost doubled, from an estimated 3.7 billion in the last 70 years to more than 7 billion today. Many countries also now face a dual burden of disease, with non-communicable conditions very much part of our daily lives. I was born at a time when many childhood viral infections, such as measles, mumps and chickenpox, were commonplace, and was exposed to and survived each infection. Vaccinations against whooping cough, diphtheria, polio and tetanus were however available, and while smallpox was still a disease risk in some areas of the globe, immunisations against this disease had ended in the UK many years earlier in 1948. As we looked at last week, by the late 1970s many felt that infectious diseases could now be conquered, and that they were a relic of the past with no place in the 21st century. This story would suggest something rather different, with the first reports of the HIV virus being made in the early 1980s. 30 years later, around 34 million people are living with this infection, and almost 30 million more have died. Perhaps evidence enough to suggest that infectious diseases are not to be underestimated. From my viewpoint in the UK, the late 1980s was marked by the emergence of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, an infectious neurological condition in cattle that has been traced back to changes in the processing of feedstock. Consumption of infected meat has also been related to an equivalent condition in humans. This out-of-the-blue disease event affected the country's economy with predicted losses of many billions of pounds. Later on in 2001, an outbreak of foot and mouth disease would have similar effects on trade and resulted in the destruction of around 2% of the national herd. As I mentioned last week, my interests do lie in both animal and human infections, and these examples help to highlight the economic as well as personal costs that such outbreaks can have. With regards to the emergence of infectious human diseases, there have been 3 pandemics in my lifetime: HIV, which I mentioned earlier, SARS and H1N1. Work at the University of Edinburgh has suggested that in Scotland it is estimated that almost half of the population may have had pandemic influenza, although many may not have realised it at that time. It's interesting to note that all 3 events can relate their origins to an animal reservoir. While on this topic, I would also like to highlight increases in the appearance of antimicrobial resistance. Once looked on as a silver bullet, many antibiotics are now no longer as effective within the medical and veterinary setting. The continuing rate of socio-economic drivers, such as population density, antibiotic drug use, and agricultural practices have all been highlighted as causes for this increase, and to the point that experts are now predicting the arrival of the post-antibiotic era. There have been 2 disease eradication events in the last 40 years, both against viral infections, namely smallpox by 1980 and rinderpest in 2011. Rinderpest was an animal contagion, but for societies reliant on livestock for traction, income and protein, the impact of this cattle plague had been devastating. Looking forward, hopes are that both guinea worm and polio may also be conquered soon. The influence of the Millennium Development Goals, viewed by many as the world's biggest promise to alleviate the suffering of poverty, will also be concluding in 2015, and the impact of this campaign are being felt on a global scale. We also consider the influence that climate change will have with regards to infectious disease. The transformation of ecosystems following increases in temperature and rainfall may well provide suitable habitats for many insect vectors, resulting in disease emergence in new and susceptible populations. Finally, over the last 40 years, there have also been 2 global recessions. You may wonder why I choose to mention this fact in closing, but fears regarding falls in health investment are commonly voiced at such times. My impression is that the emergence and spread of the infectious diseases that we've looked at today is intrinsically linked to our changing lifestyle resulting from globalization. My infectious disease landmarks are based on my own recollections, and I've enjoyed the opportunity of drawing together these different elements to share with you. However, there will be many different events that you feel should have been included, or occasions that have occurred in your own country that you feel have had a greater influence than the ones I've presented for the United Kingdom. This is the basis of our discussions for the next week. With scholars from so many different backgrounds, I'm certain that there will be many different opinions. I'd like you to work together on the discussion board and share your experiences and exchange information about what you feel are the key infectious disease events that have happened in the course of your lifetime.